internalize all of that, and then I like harbor all of this responsibility, you know?
You're going to make yourself crazy.
Like, I am crazy.
Yeah, you're going to make yourself
crazy. I am
crazy.
What's up, everybody? We are so excited. This is episode 1 of You Think, brought to you by Audiorama and our proud presenting sponsor, Invisalign. This is a lifetime project of mine. This is something that I've lived since I was 4 or 5 years old, as long as I could remember. My life has resonated around sports. I grew up with a father who was a high school football coach at our public school. My brothers and I all played for him. Best moments of my life. My best sports memories are playing with my dad, trying to win state championships, the heartbreak, the fun, the exciting moments. I was fortunate to carry that on to go play at the University of Miami. And then, of course, 14 years playing in the NFL. And, you know, and just sharing our journey and sharing the decisions and the thoughts and the conflict and the problems that we face both personally as a family. What we realized really quick is we weren't alone. You know, we weren't alone in these struggles trying to raise children and get the best out of youth sports without ignoring and without taking for granted that there is a lot of negative that comes with it. You know, how do we separate those two and ensure that the experience remains about the children in a developmentally appropriate manner? And that's what You Think is. And we had the opportunity at the Super Bowl this past year. You know, we've had some really cool conversations already. Our friends at Invisalign were fortunate enough to set up a studio. I was able to have an unbelievable conversation with Jerry Rice, and they set us up an NFL experience, and we got to kind of reflect a little bit about him. And it was at that moment where Invisalign and the folks there that run Invisalign said, this is what we want to be a part of. We want to take part in being alongside this journey and being with this voice where we can dive deep into all areas of youth sports, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything that comes along with it, because this is an area that Invisalign is super passionate about. And we couldn't be more thankful. We couldn't be more humbled by their love and their support and their faith and trust in us as we try to tell this story. You know, so the big story in the news of today, especially, you know, anytime spring comes around and everyone, pitchers and catchers report, and then the spring training opens. And, you know, I remember in years past, I'd take my kids down with my wife. She's from Orlando. And we'd go down to spring training down at the Wide World of Sports. And we went and saw the Braves train. A buddy of mine, Gordon Beckham, used to play for them. Met him when he played for the White Sox in Chicago. We'd bring the kids out, and spring training always seemed like such an annual event. And of course, this year, the big story with MLB, you know, Rob Manfred, the commissioner, came out the other day and announced that opening day is canceled. You know, teams have not reported. Some of the minor leagues are in camp, and they're just kind of washing around. But the Major League Baseball camps have not started because there is a labor dispute. It's been a really ugly battle, you know, players against owners and, you know, millionaires versus billionaires. And it's just an ugly thing. It's just terrible for the game. You know, it's something that families around the country look forward to. It's a sign that spring is here. It's a sign that, you know, we're going to have games on almost every single night, and we're going to be at the ballparks, you know, some of the most iconic venues in sports throughout the country, you know, Wrigley Field and Yankee Stadium and Fenway, and those places are going to be empty. You know, they're going to be empty for the foreseeable future because business gets in the way of sport. And I think we as a viewer and as fans, we've come to accept that with our professional sports. We've started to accept that now with our collegiate sports. And what if I told you that the concept of sports and business intersecting and causing issue isn't just unique to that level? What if I told you that business and sport is now intersecting as early as 8 and 9 and 10 years old? What if I told you that the youth sports experience in America is just a big business? It's a group of individuals, it's a group of companies, it's a group of institutions that have just kind of monopolized individual areas of the country to run a for-profit entity, which should be just about serving kids and introducing them to games that hopefully they're passionate about, and introducing them to sports that one day they could continue to pursue and build a life off of, or just sports to go hang with their friends and just be a part of a team and learn the lessons and the amazing, experiences that come with that. But unfortunately, for anybody in this country who has a child who's at a young age that's playing rec baseball or playing travel soccer or, playing flag football or 7-on-7 or whatever it is, we all realize that's just not the case. The days of the innocence of sports and where it's just a bunch of kids getting together with a coach who loves it or parents who love it and are just there for the betterment of the kids, those days are few and far between. And that conversation, the decisions that every family must make in order to just have their child participate in this world, is the genesis of what Youth Inc. is. All of these decisions about navigating this world, my wife and I would sit around and say, how do we serve the needs of our individual children? How do we make sure we put our children in the right environment that's best for them and allows them to pursue their passions and pursue what really motivates them? But right now, the environment that we're creating is there is a decision behind every door. There is a decision on what sport you play, how many sports you play. Do you play with your school? Do you play travel? Do you play rec? Do you play, do you go to individual academies? Do you work with personal trainers? At what age do you work with personal trainers? I mean, it's endless. And our goal here with You Think is to go out and provide those resources, have those conversations, and gain those perspectives of professionals throughout the country, whether they're athletes, whether they're coaches, whether they're psychologists, equipment manufacturing, trainers, all areas. We are going to explore it all with the sole purpose of giving our viewer and giving families in this country an opportunity to make the best decision for their family with the most information possible. So for our first episode, there was no question in my mind as we started to build the storyline arc of what Youth Inc. was going to look like moving forward into the future. The launching point and the starting point for this conversation, in my mind, was with a gentleman named Dr. Michael Gervais. I was familiar with Michael Gervais for a long time, for years. Everyone in the NFL circle is very familiar with his work with the Seattle Seahawks. He wrote a book with Pete Carroll following their Super Bowl runs. He works very closely with Olympians, Fortune 500 CEOs. He's a very well-known sports psychologist in this world. Last year, 2020, my last year in the NFL, I went out and joined Seattle. It was in the middle of the pandemic. It was COVID. There was no in-person meetings for the first few weeks we were together. And on one of those Zoom calls, one of the team meeting Zoom calls, up pops Dr. Michael Gervais. And it was my first time ever hearing him speak. Everything else that I had heard about him was secondhand, thirdhand, just, glowing remarks from guys that I played with or other coaches. And I finally had the chance to hear his perspective and to hear him share about mindset and accountability and what makes the best teams and, so on and so forth. And then I found myself sitting there as we're kicking around this, what does this arc look like? And where does this story and journey begin? And he was the first name that came up. So I reached out to him, reconnected from our experience together, meeting each other a few times in Seattle, and he immediately said yes. A lot of you probably already follow his podcast, highly successful podcast called Finding Mastery. The conversation was fascinating. So much of it hit home with me. We could have talked for 4 hours. The insight and the perspective that he offered into all things, the relationship between players and their coaches, the relationship between players and parents, how to talk to your kid, how to deal with adversity, how to push your child but not overdo it. The journey we're going to take you on with You Think, and the journey that I'm looking forward to going along with you, couldn't have started with a better voice. And without further ado, after a long time coming, after a lot of work and a lot of love, we are so proud to present You Think, brought to you by Audiorama and our presenting sponsor, Invisalign, and our conversation with internationally renowned sports psychologist, Dr. Michael Gervais. For our first ever episode of You Think, the one person we knew when we set out to build this show for the last year, there was one person I had in mind, and we met very briefly. My time last year in Seattle in the midst of the pandemic, in the midst of COVID, we were on a brief handful of Zoom calls together. And that's when I was first exposed to you on a deeper level. I was familiar with a lot of your work and familiar with your work with Seattle and Russell over the years. So without further ado, our first ever interview for You Think, Dr. Michael Gervais.
I'm stoked to be here. Thank you.
When I sent you that text to kind of give you the soft pitch, and then you were nice enough to respond, and we spoke for a little while that night, I was able to give you kind of the genesis of what this show was and why I thought your voice was so important to this. All the years you've spent studying sports psychology and the ability of the mind and performance, and your time with speaking with parents and coaches and young athletes to old. I just thought your perspective was the perfect launching point for everything that we hope You Think explores and the directions that we still don't even know potentially where they could go. And we just thought your voice was so important and it was so unique that we're just psyched that it finally all came to be and we're sitting here across from one another.
It's awesome. It's amazing how timelines and passions merge together. So congrats on laying a tall tent pole for something that really matters to people.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. And I know you've spent time working with, of course, Seattle Seahawks amongst other teams. I know you and Pete Carroll wrote a book together. You work with Russell, Fortune 500 company CEOs and executives, Olympians, and we can go up and down the list. You have your own podcast, Finding Mastery. But today, we are going to jump into a very complicated, we've spoken off camera about it, a complicated, incredible, but also incredibly frustrating world, and that is navigating youth sports. And, you know, as a father, and what really started the show is I lived this world, right? And me and you spoke about this. I've lived it. I grew up around it. My dad was a coach. And I find myself so many times having people ask me questions, my wife and I discussing, I don't have a lot of these answers. Like, what is the best case for these kids? And you know, where do we take them? What decisions need to be made? And I find myself saying, I don't have the answers. And it's a hard thing as a parent to feel like you don't know what's best sometimes for your own child.
Yeah. So the joke is there's no handbook on this. Yeah. And so to get into underneath the surface of it, it requires us, parents, to work from first principles. And so it's not tactics, it's not tricks or tips or hacks or shortcuts. There's none of that in being a great parent. And so it starts from working with first principles that matter to you and your spouse or your co-parent. What are first principles? There's a handful of first principles that all humans need to explore. Am I going to approach success, or am I going to avoid failure? Am I going to play it safe, or am I going to get on the edge? And when you explore and work from first principles, the downstream micro choices start to make sense. For example, one of the first principles when my wife and I had our son, we said, what are the two values that we want to make sure that we can cultivate for this, beginnings of a human, right? Like, what are those two values? And that was a first principle that would shape our micro choices as we go. So I think where we can do some service is to create a framework about how to get clear on first principles and then work from there.
Yeah. So I guess my first question to you, and this is something I find myself saying a lot, right? I want my kids, when people ask me, why do you want your kids to play sports? The first two things that I say is, A, I want them to learn lessons, develop tools and resources and life experiences that I believe sports can teach unlike any other industry, especially for young kids. Teamwork, perseverance, hard work, adversity, all of those things. But I guess my first thing is we got to define what those skills are and why are they so important. So I guess the perspective I'd love to hear from you is when people say, I want my kids to experience and develop these life lessons at a young age through sports, in your experience dealing with quote unquote successful people down the road, what are those life skills? Like, what are those important tools that you see developed at an early age through sports that you see in common with the folks that you work with that are high achievers?
This cuts both ways because some of the skills that are developed in sport are incredibly facilitative to become one's best. So all the ones that you just mentioned, and there's a whole litany of others. Right. There's also a downside. And so it's not a clear picture at being human. Humanness there's a messiness to it. Yep. But so the other side is there's some narcissism, there's some OCD and obsessiveness, there's a whole host of responses with anxiety that come up when pressure is built. So there's the yin and the yang. There's the amazing, and then there's sometimes the downstream unfavorable things that take place. Yeah. But to answer your question more concretely, let me pull back one more time. That's just to set the tone that this is not easy, right? If we push too hard, there's downstream consequences. If we don't push enough, maybe somebody can't quite figure out what they're capable of. And so the ones that I'm interested in, it starts with relationships. And so if you just net the whole thing out, sport is a beautiful canvas to learn more about yourself, your relationship with yourself. Obviously, nobody does it alone, even individual athletes. They don't do it alone. There's coaches, there's support mechanisms, there's partners that you're going to bang the ball back with, if it's tennis or volleyball or whatever. Nobody does this alone. So it's first your relationship with yourself, then your relationship with others, hopefully a relationship with your community and the planet Earth. But there's also a relationship with winning and losing and mistakes and risk and anxiety. So it's the relationship that you're building that sits right at the center of sport.
And do you see those common threads? Do you see any correlation between the people that you work with, the highly performing CEOs, and then obviously the people in the sports arena, but the people outside the sports arena? Do you see in your work with them correlation to those that were exposed to youth sports at an early age? Is there ability to connect? Is it connecting? Can you say, all right, I can tell this person experienced youth sports maybe through college, through high school, whatever element it was? Do you see any correlation there, or is it independent of one another?
100%. There's tendencies that are part of the fabric of sport that allow people to do well, right? There's a timeliness, there's a team mateness, not team cultivator, but to be good in sport, usually you got to be a good teammate.
Yeah.
So that's the relationship bit as well. There's the attention to detail, there's the work ethic. There's so many, and those show up in the business world. They, hands down, those are some of the great attributes. So the short answer is yes. And then the other side of it is that there's also arts. There's also community-minded projects. If we just looked at sport, I think it's a little too narrow, but it's a great vehicle to learn more about who you are, right? And it's a great vehicle for parents to learn about how they want to help shape particular values and particular ways of thinking, ways of using their mind and their body. So it's a beautiful molded opportunity to be able to express the best of the human experience.
And you said something interesting before. You said, we are a product of the people we interact with, whether it's the person that you spend volleying the ball in tennis or your coach, and we'll get into some of those relationships because I really find that super fascinating. I want to dive into, but there's always the age-old question, are we all products of just innate abilities? Are certain people just inevitably born with greater ability to achieve, whether it's cognitively or physically, genetics, the whole nature versus nurture, or are we the product of our environment? Are we the product of the culture we grew up in, the neighborhood, access to certain opportunities? And I always find that balance to be very hard. So what would you tell parents, raising their child who's 8, 9, 10 years old and they're experiencing sport, like not to make the amount of parents I've heard say to me, well, my kid's not going to be a basketball player because me and my wife are not tall. And I find myself just fascinated by that logic that we're trying to place like innate characteristics on 8, 9, and 10-year-olds and trying to project that into the future to determine what sport your child should be exposed to at an early age. I just find that very fascinating.
Well, call it 40 years ago, we first got exposed in the West to some of the practices that were taking place, in Eastern Bloc countries, Eastern Europe. And they were definitely scanning, probably still are at some level, scanning early biodata to better place, from a physiological standpoint and a cognitive aptitude, place people in environments where they think they could be most successful. Now, here in the West, we value individualism much more, but we don't really do that. But your point is it genetic? Is it do you environmentally have influences, or is it something that you can sort out on your own, with your culture? It's both.
Like anything, it's a combination.
It's a combination of it. Right. It's harder if your biology or your physiology has some deficits relative to the other peers. Right. But look at Spud Webb.
There's always exceptions.
Yeah, look at Russ. Yeah. So Russell Wilson, one of the great quarterbacks, and definitely doesn't fit the prototype of the way that it's supposed to look. But then he, with his mobility and his other attributes, he was able to shift and work in ways that, led us to a Super Bowl, 2 of them.
And mindset.
Absolutely.
And I know that's really your specialty, and you brought up Russ. So how much of that mindset can be, right? When you talk to Russell Wilson, I had a time to spend with him last year and really see behind the curtain and just his approach and his mentality and all that. But how do we correlate, and how do we bring that to teaching my 10-year-old son? Right? It seems like on the surface, it seems like a very complicated conversation to say, hey, you need to be like Russell Wilson, you need to develop it. How do we start implementing mindset and approach and all of those characteristics through youth sports at a young age that are applicable and that are developmentally appropriate?
I love this question because two parts. One is I would hope that we don't say, you should be like Russ. Yeah. You should be like Mike. You should be like whomever. Like what we want to do is to help cultivate, based on our conversations with our little people, them to be their very best, whatever that is. And it's the aspiring to it that is the magic. It's not being it necessarily. It's the want, it's the interest, it's the environment that supports the right risk taking to be able to invite people to get right up on the edge and to love that. So before I go into the characteristics, I think this is materially important. You mentioned it earlier. Parents are one of the reasons that people leave sport. Kids leave sport before the age of 11. The majority of kids leave sport before the age of 11. It's the car ride home.
Yeah.
It's also, there's an economic thing involved in it as well. There's an access bit. There's also coaching that's involved here, good and bad. Yeah. But 11, majority of kids leave sport by 11 that feels like we are really butchering this beautiful, opportunity for kids. So the car ride home, if you're talking about the way that we have conversations with kids, this is one of the most important parts of your kid loving going for it or feeling shameful or nervous about reporting to an adult how they did. So the simple question on the car ride home or the simple engagement is something like this. I love watching you go for it. I just think it's so much fun to see you try to figure it out. What did you try to figure out in today's practice or today's game? As opposed to, how many points did you score? Yeah. Did you notice that Johnny scored a couple points? Yeah. Did you notice that Jane actually was able to do the double and you're still at the single? Like, what do you think that's going to happen? And so it's rewarding in the conversation, the becoming. And that is the essence of how parents can show up in a meaningful way.
I'm having this, and right now I'm replaying every single car ride home I had as a kid, and now every single car ride I've had with my children. And some car rides, I'll be honest, that I'm not proud of. There's been moments where looking back and reflecting and hearing you say that has all these visions bouncing back in my head where I do struggle with that. And again.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you. What is the struggle?
The struggle for me, and I think this is, again, an important component to why this project, this You Think project was so important to me, because not only am I thinking that I can go out and try to get all these tools and have these conversations with really interesting people who bring really unique perspective for everybody else, selfishly, I want it for myself, right? Like that's a lot of the inspiration of this was internal and my struggles. I grew up with a father who was my high school football coach, love him to this day. We coached the kids. He was hard as hell on us. Our car ride home after a tough game or after the state senior year or whatever state championship loss, like we lived it 24 hours a day. And I carry a lot of that with me and find myself doing some of the things that I didn't love as a kid. And also having hopefully the perspective of saying, okay, I need to pull it back a little bit. And it's very hard for me. The way I'm wired and what always served me well as a player was intensity. Nothing was ever good enough. Continue to reach for more. Continue to practice and perform, outside of my comfort zone. The deep learning, the talent code. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but the idea of never operating in a comfort zone and failure and what lessons you can learn. Like that's always what drove me. But now I'm passing off all these philosophies of my whole life of sports on 9 and 10-year-old kids. My 9 and 10-year-old kids and. There's times where
as an adult
trying
to install, which is a very football word, right? Trying to install an operating system,
and there's times where after, Mike, I can tell you, like after it all comes down and we go to bed, like I'll lay there and be like, I didn't handle that great.
Yeah.
And I regret it.
Do you talk to them about it?
Always.
Yeah. So we used to think that couples or adults in relationships that fought a lot, certainly they're not going to make it. Certainly this isn't going to work out. But what we know now from a research perspective is that the repair is materially more important than the argument. So there's some rules to arguing, right? And you don't cut the person, you work on the behavior that is affecting you. So if you can talk about yourself, this is good for parenting here. You can talk about your experience, but you're coaching behavior and you're loving the person, right? So first of all, actually, let me go back up. Parent. Don't coach.
Well, we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
That's another big struggle.
Love your kids, create the environment for them to explore, work on the value system, and we'll get to that.
We're going to get to that because that's a huge component of this, not only for me personally, but just the arc of the show. Okay, so let me role play this for a second. All right, so we have one of those conversations where you just know you didn't handle it great, you were too hard on them, or the expectations you set were too much, right? Whatever, and I do feel like I can be honest with myself and reflect and be like, I didn't handle that great, could have been better, and replay it in my mind. What does that conversation now, either before bed or in the morning at breakfast, to hopefully reset, acknowledging, hey, last night, Daddy, I handled that wrong. Like, I thought a lot about it. What does that conversation look like with a 10-year-old, right? It's one thing to have that conversation with your wife or your husband as adults. What does that conversation look like between a parent and a kid following maybe one of those poor experiences after a game or a practice?
Vulnerability.
Honesty?
Vulnerability
Okay.
first.
Yeah.
It's a great chance to model that you're not perfect. You are hopefully still his hero or her hero. So modeling honesty and vulnerability is it. And so the vulnerability is like allowing them to feel what you're experiencing, the letdown that you have, the sadness that you have about the way that you've treated this beautiful little soul, and like, damn, and just let them know that. And it's not the words, it's the commitment to be real and vulnerable with them, which pays, there's a flywheel effect for that. Because when they see you as the hero also modeling strength and courage in vulnerability, that is, in essence, a great teaching opportunity to capture those opportunities.
So you're saying there is a lot of value of your kids seeing you not perfect.
Oh my God. Yeah. And you know what? Here's where we make a mistake as adults, as parents, is that we come in, let's say we do have that high awareness, that recognition, like, I just want to do better. Yeah. What was I doing? First order business before you go into the room to talk to them is like, where am I coming from? Yeah. Like really do some honest work with yourself. Yeah. Where is this coming from? Is this from my parents? Is this from coaches? Is this from my anxiety that I'm going to not be able to pass on everything that I know? Am I concerned about the way my family looks? Because
I would say everything you just said it's probably all of those things. So for me personally.
Yeah, so do an honest inventory. Where is this one coming from? And am I tired? Are other stressors in my life happening and I'm just kind of kicking downstream?
Yeah,
and so you do that honest inventory, and I would encourage you to write it down. So it's not just this. Psychology is already invisible. So write it down to take the invisible and make it something you can look at. Then you can work with that a little bit easier. And then once you get honest with yourself, then you go and have the conversation. And the mistake is not to do the first bit of work. Try to sort it out when you're talking with the kid. And then what ends up happening is we use our mind, not our heart. Yeah. And it's a 30-year-old mind or 50-year-old mind with a 9-year-old mind. And then it's all of a sudden it's like, it's crazy. Use your heart.
Yeah, it's not compatible, right? Yeah. That conversation mind, that's a really interesting way to put it.
And then last bit here is that if you go back to first principles, so say you're feeling something, you're aware of it, you've made some sense of that as an adult, and then you say, right, what do I want? What are my first principles I want to work from? And then when you go back into the room, you're working to help those amplified.
That's really interesting.
And let me be really concrete. Two of the first principles I work with for my son is strength and kindness. And so I could double click under that and open up what those words mean. But almost everything I'm doing is those first. And then I'm going to layer on some other ones like creativity and. But I'm always working from those first principles. So I need to model them and then work from that place and then challenge him to do the same.
I think kindness, I think that's relatively self-explanatory. I know that's it. But I'd be interesting, when you say strength, explain that. When you're saying you want one of your first two principles of raising your child, kindness, of course, way you treat others, way you treat yourself, relationships.
That's right.
That makes sense to me off the top. When you say strength, like how do you define that? Like what does that mean to you as far in regards to raising your kid? I'd be curious about that.
Can he do the hard thing when it's hard? And I'm talking about like being a global citizen. Yeah. I'm talking about being an upstander is a word my son introduced to me. Like that's how he thinks about it.
That's interesting.
Not a bystander, but an upstander. Yeah. Like standing up for yourself with dignity, for others with dignity, like having the courage and strength to speak truth to power. to wave your arms even when there might be some tax on you to say this isn't right.
It's interesting.
And I'm fascinated with the people that are able to stand with grounded presence and fully be themselves when it's hard to do so. It's easy to feel okay at home. It's easy. You know, it's great over a cup of tea or a glass of wine or whatever. Like, okay, everything's nice and easy. But what about when it's hard?
Yep.
So that's the first principle.
That's really interesting. I'm going to segue a little bit, but I still think it's kind of related. Something that is a coaching philosophy of mine, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it, and I'll get to it. But you read so much. I talked about the talent code and what that book teaches, and my first conversation with you about the 15%. Always expose your child to maybe 15% outside of their comfort zone, 15% more than they're capable of in the moment. And there's a lot of science of that and learning and
Which
development.
is hard to do, though.
It's very hard to thread that needle. What's 15%?
Right, yeah.
I get it.
It's really tricky to do. And so trial and error is how you do it. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And the conversation that I find very difficult to thread, to your point, is what is the balance between putting yourself in a situation where failure is probably inevitable, hence growth, development.
Yeah.
And then I read something where, one of your quotes is that you believe by, and I know mindset has always been at the backbone of all your philosophy, is how do you continue to find the balance between failure and the value of those learning lessons and continuing to build and sustain confidence?
Okay.
Right? For a young child, it seems to be those two things are very connected. And there's two schools of thought. There's a lot of families that are friends of ours where they're gonna put their kid in a safe environment where they're always gonna be the best player and they're never gonna be outside of their comfort zone. They're gonna play in a little bubble, and after every game they always do great because it's church league, it's rec, it's whatever it is. And then there's the other side of the argument. I would say I'm more to this side personally, where your kid might not be the best kid on his team, but he's gonna be challenged. He's gonna have to work. If he doesn't play, his playing time's gonna go down. I'm not gonna go complain to the coach. You gotta fight for yourself. And balancing failure and confidence when you've moved back 5 places in the lineup because you're on how do we as parents find that balance? How do we find that 15%?
Okay. It's really thoughtful. I'm going to give you a couple frameworks to work from.
Yeah.
And then there are some simple solutions here. But so this goes back to parenting. And one of the great things that we can do to help our young people is be on as close as possible to the same page with our co-parent. If you're not a co-parent, okay, well then it's your job to be really clear, right, about the first principles. Okay, so then if we double click underneath that, there's this idea of structured learning versus guided discovery. Okay, now this is a model.
Yeah.
So structured learning is I'm going to teach my child how to, let's do basketball for just a moment.
Yeah.
Tuck my arm in,
Yeah.
snap it, and then leave it at 1 o'clock. And do that over and over and over again. And this is what a good shot looks like.
Yep.
And let's get our 10,000, 20,000 reps in it. The research is not 10. It's popular culture that it's
The
10.
Malcolm Gladwell book started the whole 10,000 hour and all of that.
Well, it's born on the original research of Dr. Anders Ericsson.
Okay. Yeah.
And when you look at the research, it's more like 17.5 to 20,000.
Really?
Yeah, but 10,000 sounds
It was a little more catchy.
it's good. So
It
anyway,
sold a lot of books.
Mastery is a further extension of it. But anyway, structured learning is that mechanism. Guided discovery is, hey, Susie, you want to learn how to shoot? Yeah, great. All right, there's the ball, there's the hoop, and maybe you'll lower the hoop so it's a 6-foot hoop or whatever it might be, and then say, great, see how you do.
Yeah.
Figure it out. That's guided discovery. So structured learning, the kid will get better faster. Okay? Over time. Guided discovery takes longer, but they know this angle, 2 hands, 1 hand. So they're explorers now. So it goes back to first principles.
Yeah.
Do you want them to be great at precision and rote, or do you want them to be explorers of their capabilities?
And that's a larger conversation. It might be better for them as basketball players in both the immediate and the near future, but as people, creative minds, problem solving, critical thinking.
And I would also,
maybe it's not.
But yes. And I would also add to it is that if I were to pick a team and I was pressured within 18 months to win something, structured learning.
Yep.
But if I am saying, okay, listen, 36 months, 5 years, 10 years, Where do I want to lay my bet? Guided discovery. Because let's imagine a forward roll, for example. So we got our kid on the top of a hill, your kid, my kid. I'm going to take structured learning. You're going to take guided discovery. I don't know if that's the case or not.
I can't do a forward roll.
Okay, no. Right. So, okay, perfect. Then we should go do this.
You should have teach me to do a forward roll.
And if I said, hey, forward rolls, like just go for it, figure it out. You would maybe go sideways, you go all different ways, but you would have better command of how your brain and your mind and your body are working as you're exploring. Just the tuck your shoulder, go down, do it again and again, you would just get that skill. So over time, true masters of craft.
Interesting.
You want them to understand the fullness of this sport.
Even if it leads to more failure early.
So let's talk about failure. Failure and mistakes are different. Okay, so learning is what what you and I are getting at right now. Okay, so you and I want to learn. That's why we're in this conversation, right? We want our children to learn. So to learn, there's that right balance between intensity and deep focus and enjoyment. Now, it's not fun to get to that deep focus place. That is very hard to do, and it's rare. Most people don't go there. It's nauseatingly to get to that deep focus. So we have to create the runway of fun before it to help our kids get to that place almost accidentally. Okay, so mistakes happen when you are getting to the edges of your capabilities. That's where so as soon as my son gets to the edges of his capabilities and form breaks down and movement is kind of sloppy or he's in a place where he's not quite sure, I am celebrating like a wild person.
Right.
Like, that's it. Okay, good. Like, how do we do that again tomorrow?
Yeah.
How do you get to that place again tomorrow? And he's like, Dad, I don't know. That was hard. And I say, that's exactly how this is supposed to be. Great. So were you having fun before? Yeah, but then all of a sudden, like the game picked up and it got faster, and balls were coming. Okay. So what would be one way to calm yourself down so that you can slow it down? And now I'm working on a mental skill of calm and confidence to get to your point. So we want to reward mistake making to get to deep learning. Okay? So you hear that.
Yeah.
Adults hear that in business and they're like, yeah, right, fail fast, fail forward. We want to encourage mistakes. That's not true in big business. Those words are said, but as adults, we don't do a great job backing that.
Yeah.
Because if you fail too much, guess
You
what?
have negative consequences.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if you make too many mistakes, guess what?
And we're probably all guilty of that as coaches and parents. I know I am.
100%.
Something we always talk about with our kids is a philosophy that I have is we're always going to make practice an environment that you're probably going to fail a lot.
It's great. But I would strike the word fail.
Mistakes?
Yeah.
Where you make mistakes?
Yeah. We're going to structure this to be deep learning.
Okay.
And to do that, you're going to make a lot of mistakes.
Okay.
Okay. So I would use mistakes and learning and put those together. And then when mistakes are being made, that there's different types of coaching. There's mastery coaches that are truly masters at bringing the best out of somebody. And then there's like amateur coaches. There's performance coaches. There's high performance coaches. But mastery coaches look at the being and are so curious. They're asking questions and they're using questions to understand what's already inside you. Because there's a fundamental belief that that person already has some insights. My job is to help illuminate them, make them be theirs, rather than the expert over here.
Yep.
Wait, real quick.
Yeah.
On the failure bit, I would challenge parents and coaches to really explore what failure is. And the cheap version is that there's a scoreboard, and if you don't have enough points, you failed. I think that seems ridiculous. When you're thinking about cultivating human potential, the scoreboard, that's an important metric. Because if you don't get that thing right long enough, you don't get to play.
Right.
So I understand it. But that is absolutely, there's a brilliant opportunity to redefine failure that in an authentic way that works towards growth.
And it's funny you say that because as we're venturing now, and we're going to get into this parenting coaching thing because it's a struggle that I've dealt with personally. But before we get there, it's funny. The way I always tell the kids, the teams that we coach is the scoreboard is a byproduct.
Yeah, I love that.
It's right. We're not going into. So I'll take my 9-year-old son's baseball team that I coach. They're good. They're not the elite team in the country that's going to travel around, but locally they're competitive. but they're 9, right? They're learning to pitch, they're learning pickoffs and balks, and it's a lot on it to transition to kid pitch baseball at 9 years old, right? And there's all forms of abilities and experiences. But the message that I always try to tell them is practice is going to be, and I say this to the parents as well, practice on my team is going to be incredibly hard. We are going to challenge you. We are not going to punish mistakes, but we are going to correct, we are going to be hard on you if you make mistakes doing it the way you're not being coached to do. The outcome is secondary. Do it the way we want it done, and if you do it wrong 100 times, if you do it right 100 times and you fail 100 times, we're good with that. But if you start doing it your way and the wrong way, and you do have success, we're going to correct you. And these kids look at us and they're like, well, what do you mean, coach? I fielded the ball and threw the kid out at first base. I said, but yeah, but did you field it off your left foot? No. So I'm going to correct you because I don't care about the outcome. Because my job right now as your coach is to make you always field it off your left foot, because in 10 years from now, your chances are you'll be more consistent throwing the kid out at first base, right? So that's always been our practices are hard, and we are hard on our 9-year-old kids, and we make them do it. And my whole philosophy of that is, if when you're making mistakes, and I know we don't want to use the word failure, but if you learn that hard work and fighting through, and now you can go into the game and have success, we've reinforced the connection between what it takes to have the success. We're not searching for success by any means necessary, right? Like that's always been the philosophy. But as a result, I tend to be very hard on them and high expectations and very demanding. And then I take a step back and I'm like, am I accomplishing what I think I'm accomplishing?
Well, what do you want to accomplish?
When I coach the kids' teams, I have an enormous amount of responsibility, inherent responsibility that I shoulder, that every single parent who entrusted me with their kid, it could be basketball, baseball, whatever, it doesn't matter the sport, that I want every single one of their kids to be the best baseball player, basketball player possible, all while learning what we started the conversation of. I am such a big believer in the value in the tools of youth sports, toughness, perseverance, dealing with people who maybe think differently than me, being part of something bigger than myself. Like, to me, that's what youth sports is, and we're just using baseball or football, whatever it is, as a vehicle. It's arbitrary to me. But I feel when you give your kid to me and we're working for 2 hours, 4 hours a week, whatever it is, like, if I don't give him back to you better, and if I don't give him back to you with a better understanding of hard work and perseverance and toughness and skill and success and attitude, all those things, I've failed, and I don't want to fail any of these kids. Like, I feel a real responsibility, not only to my 3 kids, but to everyone else's kids who give to me, and it's a lot.
Yeah. So if I were to add to what you're doing, I would say stay with the philosophy that feels true and authentic to you. Because when you get pressed or you feel stress, and you all of a sudden become a different person, you're going to lose people. So your philosophy is about a hard experience, right? And that refinement is going to come over time by being hardened, right? And the hard is on the left foot, great technique, understand your relationship with mistakes, and you're going to have adults coaching you pretty intensely. And then I would add to so that's technical and physical focus. So you're working on physical and technical, and you're saying that you want some of these other dimensional psychological bits as well. So I would add to it that I would almost over-rotate to foundationally setting up the psychological principles that you want to embed in it. So here's what's happening in pro sport right now. 20 years ago, did you have a sports psychologist embedded in the team? No. 20 years ago, was the mental part of the game important?
Yes.
Yeah, right? Like foundationally.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, that's not new.
What would you say in the pro level the importance of the mental part of the game is?
I think it's more important than the physical.
Yeah, right, because everyone's got the physicals there.
What separates truly great players is the mindset, is the approach, is all the mental components that go in. Everyone's big, fast, and strong.
Exactly, right? And so what we're seeing now in big sport is that people are saying controlling coaches 60 years ago wanted to do it all. Okay, no problem, because that's where sport was. They were the life coach, they were the technical, they were the nutritionist, they were the spiritual guru, there were a lot of things. And then science started to add to the mix, and they said, Eventually they said, okay, let's get some S&C, strength and conditioning. Let's get some medical. Let's get some nutrition. And now we're in the phase of let's get some psychology in. And the whole thing you can feel starting to become more robust. So no longer is it a sports psych in the best programs over there, referral outside of the building. There's an embeddedness in it. And so I would encourage you to model that and do the same and say so this is how I would, if I'm coaching, which I'm not coaching my kids, each practice develop one mental skill before it starts. So there's 4 minutes of the time that you're going to carve out, and you're going to say, right, today I'm going to teach you about confidence. This is how confidence works, and then you're speaking to them. And listen, there's no secrets here. Confidence only comes from what you say to yourself. That's it. It doesn't come from success or failure or mistakes or doing well. It comes from how you speak to yourself. So is it boys that you're coaching?
Yes.
So, Joey, tell me how you speak to yourself when you're having a blast. Joey, when it's scary and you're working it way through and you feel something in your body, how do you want to speak to yourself? Joey, what is it like when you feel really confident? How do you speak to you? So you're just asking them to become aware of this relationship, the way that they speak. And then so I'd hit that at the top. And then the next one, or maybe hit that for a week. And then next week I'd say, right, we're going to talk about breathing, because breathing is really important for calming down. And guys, we're going to do some box breathing. 4 seconds in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 at the bottom. We're going to do 10 of those before we get started. You're going to get a little relaxed. We're going to do that right now. And then I'd fire up the intensity. So each week, the responsibility that you have as a youth coach is really high for character, for philosophy, and for psychology. And so I would start with that. And, I'd love to provide resources for you and your audience about what are some of those basic principles.
We're going to get there.
Yeah.
That's our last topic. So hold those thoughts. I got one other, really, again, I think a meat of this conversation is where I want to segue. And you've said it a few times. You've talked about relationships. And sports is a relationship-based industry, whether it's for young children all the way up through the professional levels. The interesting aspect relationship-wise at a young level is, and we said it earlier, the two pieces of this, right? There's the player, there's the child, there's the coach, and there's the parent. And let's assume the parent and the coach are two separate people for this moment. The bad experiences, and you said it before, typically are from the parent and the coach. The child, there's very few children who bring a bad experience to a team or are their own root of the bad experience. There's a few. There's just kids who aren't great team players, they have bad attitudes, whatever. There's always exceptions. But in my experience, and I've probably been guilty of this for full transparency, where the parents and the coach, typically one of those two things is. So I want to start with the parenting, right? Mm-hmm. And this is a struggle that I have. I see two types of parents, right? I call them the drop-off parent and the over-hype helicopter parent, right? Mm-hmm. They don't miss a second of whether it's a workout in the off-season, a tournament, they are hyper involved. And then there's the parent who makes the occasional game, never comes to practice, super casual. And there's times when I just spent 2 hours coaching 15 kids in basketball and I'm sweating and we're teaching and we're running and then the parent picks the kid up and they haven't seen a minute of what we did, then I'm like, that sounds amazing. Because I'm going to go home from this practice. I'm going to think about the practice. I'm going to think of every individual kid. How do I get them better? And how do I piece this team together where everybody has to play and give us a chance for the kids to have success and win and individual success, team success, right? And it's never ending. It's this constant loop because I'm so vested in the kids' success, right?
Awesome.
I live it.
Awesome. Yeah.
Well, it's awesome and it's exhausting.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And the root of that is that was my life as a player. It never stopped. And it served me well for 15 years. Mm-hmm. It doesn't serve you great when you're coaching youth kids. And that's the struggle that I have. So I guess my question to you is there one of those two scenarios? Or is it like anything where it's a little bit more in the middle of what does the involvement of a parent ideally in your mind look like?
I think you and I will share an insight here. And if people knew what I knew about youth sport as a vehicle to become a professional athlete, to become an Olympian, parents would not be pushing their kids. If they knew the dark side, the scar tissue, the cost, the low self-esteem, the high anxiety, the suicide flirtation. If they knew what I knew, I feel it now because there is pain when we push. There is pain when we're speaking to the doing only, and we are abandoning the essence of the spirit of the being. And kids get lost. So first, I just want to if we're not working from a place of true support, and we're not working from an earnest place to help them be the most beautiful soul that they can be, we are fundamentally wrong. And so there is a dark side to youth development. And if we don't get it right, we set up an adult experience for a long time where the scar tissue is too high. And so it's one of the most sacred positions is a mentor. And that's really what we are, is we are mentoring and shaping and being a resource for what success looks like as a being. Mm-hmm. And if we're overly keyed up about later success and we're not fully present seeing this beautiful little soul trying to figure it out, a little scared, a little excited, like bringing joy to it, and then all of a sudden we hammer them on top of it because when they're 10 years older, when they're 9 to 19, it's serious now. Yeah. So I need to prepare you now because it's going to be serious later. Holy shit, how long it takes to have any sense of mastery. Yeah. It takes a long time. And if we don't find joy in it, we won't spend the time in it over, really days of years. So the dark side is so high. And I think that parents benevolently want the best and coaches benevolently do want the best. And so it's just a moment to say, check in of where we're coming from. And most of us that are earnest and we want to pour into a young mind and a young body, we have a little anxiety because we didn't quite get all of it right when we were kids. That's why we're so on it at your age and my age to want to give back, right? Like the giving back usually happens later in life for people once they have had a full life and they've got time, but you're in the stride, of building on your second career. Yeah. And so I think that there's an anxiety that we need to address first in ourselves. And if we can do nothing else other than honor the essence of the child and help them understand how to work with their mind to enjoy stress. Yeah. And so stress doesn't mean it's bad. Like we use that word that it's a bad word. It's actually the mechanism to get better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so funny you say that because just thinking of my own children, my oldest child, my son, who is highly competitive. He wants to be on the best team. He wants to get the ball in the championship game. Like he not only says it, which sometimes with kids they could tell you what.
But he also wants your love. And one of the things that he can do is get it from listen, he's got either a spotlight on him, or he's got a tall tent pole shadow.
Well, he's got a combination
because of your
both.
Success.
Locally, he's got a combination of both.
That's
and
right.
I internalize a lot of that, and that's something that I'm conscious of.
Yeah.
But as far as what you said about the stress, like the stress brings out the best of him. Mm. And then
awesome.
I have my younger children. They're younger. They're playing at a little bit of a different stage in the game right now. Like I have to be very conscious that I don't introduce too much stress to them, because stress is something that they don't handle as well. So I guess it goes into my next parenting question. It's a really good segue. What would you say to parents that are navigating not only how to be a sport parent and a parent with children playing youth sports, but within your own house, you have kids of different skill levels, different interest levels, one kid's playing competitive girls soccer, and maybe your youngest son plays rec baseball. And so you gravitate towards spending a ton of time driving your son or daughter to 1 million games and tournaments because that's what their interests are and that's what their love is, so you support it. But then all of a sudden your other child's saying, how come you don't spend all this time doing these things with me? I like playing on my teams. I don't know. Like, I think that's a really complicated thing that a lot of parents deal with. And what they tend to do, and what I see firsthand, is everyone's going to just do what the first child did. Mm-hmm. And we're all just going to follow the same path. But my 3 kids have very different needs. My daughter's soccer experience is very different right now. Currently, she's young, she's 9, than my older son's baseball experience. It's very different, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah, right. That's awesome.
Because if I put her in a really competitive environment like my older son is, I'm not sure she's ready yet, and that's okay. And I know there's a lot of psychology between how young girls developmentally and young boys and within different genders. I get all that, and I don't pretend to know it all, but I think that's a challenge.
Oh yeah, it sounds like you're threading that needle pretty well.
I don't know.
The answer is
I don't know.
Know the child.
Yeah.
That's the answer.
Yeah.
Know the child. And if you can do it in this order, because we're talking about growth,
Yeah.
support, then challenge. So create the environment to support. So they know you've got a net, that you're a backstop, like support in everything.
Yeah.
Right? And then challenge. Challenge just that 10 to 15. Sometimes it's just the 1%, a little bit more, a little bit better, a little bit sharper, a little bit easier, a little bit of letting go, whatever it might be. Like support, then challenge is the first principle. Yeah.
It's interesting because, again, you're very good at segueing. It's almost like you have your own podcast. It's like you've done this before. So, again, I look at the way when I'm at and some of the kids, I don't coach my older son's baseball team anymore. I used to. I don't anymore. He's now plays on a different team with coaches that do a great job, and I can be dad. Every once in a while, I'll help out at practice and run a drill. Or this off season, we did some strength and conditioning stuff where I would take them through like winter off season stuff. Which was awesome, which was a blast. That's like right in my wheelhouse.
Yeah, right,
No baseball, just we're gonna get you faster. We're gonna jump and run and whatever.
Dude, I'd like to be coached by you with that fire and the intensity, and it'd be fun.
Some people in town agree with you, and a lot of people don't. It depends on who you asked. But what the struggle, again, I just believe it's important for me to show our viewers, I can recognize the vulnerability and the issues that I'm having because I don't think I'm alone, right? I think a lot of people hopefully are going to watch this conversation and be like, I get that. And maybe they didn't know it at the time or they didn't know how to express it. My hope is that they see this conversation and they can relate to hopefully a lot of things that what you're saying, but also my perspective. And I guess the long part I'm trying to get to is, what is that balance between, I find when I'm not as involved and I'm not at the practice and I hear from their coach or their mom how they had a really good practice. And then on the other hand, when I see them and they'll be like, Dad, are you coming to practice tomorrow? Yeah, of course. I'm gonna pick you up after school. We'll get something to eat and we'll go to practice. Oh, awesome. You want Dad? Oh, yeah, Dad, I want you to come. But then we'll leave practice and I'll be like, you weren't as good. So then I start saying to myself, you have your best games when I wasn't there. Not always, I'm generalizing.
Yeah.
But I seem like you have so many great moments when I'm not there, but then obviously I want to be there but I find after every play, they look. So there's this weird thing between they want me involved, I want to be involved. Is it better off that I'm not involved? And it kind of goes back to my first question, what is the best? I don't know. I don't know. At times I'm I think I should never come.
Yeah.
And you'd be better.
Well,
but then they say, Dad, I can't believe you missed my game. Are you coming back? And I'm and I'm gutted, because I missed something.
Yeah, I really appreciate how you're trying to sort this out.
Yeah.
Right, because it's not simple. You love your kids and you want to see them do their very best.
I always say I almost love all these kids that I coach too much.
Yeah.
And I wish I cared less.
Yeah.
Right? When you care, indifference is a bad quality, but it makes life a lot less stressful.
It's one of the greatest insults we can provide another person is indifference and ignoring. It's one of the worst thing you can do to another person.
Right, but there's almost, as bad as it is, for selfishly, it's a lot easier way to go through life when you don't internalize everyone else's success or failure based on whether you did. Every time a kid does a bad job at one of my games, my first reaction is I'm doing a bad job with this kid. I got to find a way to get through to him and have him find success. Have him find, when he walks off this field, you got a base hit. And it might only be 1 out of 5, but it's better than 0. I internalize all of that, and then I harbor all of this responsibility, You're
gonna make yourself crazy.
I am crazy.
Yeah, you're gonna make yourself crazy.
I am crazy.
Yeah. So I one of the things I think is really important that you're picking up on is that whatever they do on the field and they look up for approval, work on that one.
Positive feedback.
That would be
don't have them look at me.
I'd say. Yeah. That's almost like the symptom that your approval matters more than the execution.
Yeah, Totally.
You know, so then there's some pent up anxiousness
Totally.
about like, what did he think? What did he think? Imagine that if you looked over at your coach every time
Yeah.
that you dropped a ball or you made a touchdown looking for approval.
Yeah.
Like it would be.
Yeah. That's a good point. You know,
Yeah.
find their ability to find. I always say, be like, my kids are like, how'd you think I did? I'd be like, you know.
Yeah, you know.
I said, you know if that was good or bad. You don't need me to tell you.
Yeah. So I'd say that, and I'd quickly reframe to, what did you figure out? What did you learn? Because they want approval from us. We are their providers. We create safety for them. And so if we're not careful, the approval comes in the form of performance. And then what ends up happening later is that they foreclose all of their identities for one. And that one identity is, I'm an athlete. And then now it's that athlete part is about doing well for favor and approval of others. So as a younger adult, they go into whatever they're doing, and it feels like their whole life is at stake because their brains are lit up looking for approval because their identity is at stake. Because what do we do as kids or as parents and coaches is that we just focused on the doing. So for you, I would totally over-rotate on casting a light on other aspects because you have such a tall tent pole for them of your success, what you've done historically, you know, in the game that you love. So I would over-rotate on school and being, like social, because their intensity and your intensity is going to take care of itself. I would over-rotate on the other two.
Yeah, I don't think we lack that part.
No, I would over-rotate that.
So I want to transition. We talked about the relationship between parents and coaches and the impact they can have on the experience. And we talked a lot about it from the parent perspective, but I just want to now, let's look at it from the other perspective, right? Like what messages would you give coaches? You know, something I'm a big believer in with my teams we've covered from the coaching perspective is all the qualities we talked about earlier, but also I'm a big believer in communication, right? Like when I bring up the team at the end of practice, I want the parents around. I want the parents to hear. I encourage our parents to come to practice. I want you at practice. I want you to hear. You know, a lot of coaches at the end, they take their kids in the far corner of the gym or on the field in the outfield to talk to them in private. Like, I want the parents to hear my message to the kid.
Very cool.
I think it's important. Very cool. I think that transparency, they should know what I'm telling them. Because again, my kids' ages, they're 9 and 10 years old. If you got in the car and I asked my kid, what'd your coach say to you at the end? He could probably recite 10, 15% of it and probably not get the essence of what the message was. But I'd love to hear the message from the coach. Yeah. So now I flip my hat around and I want them to hear the good. I want them to hear the bad, the things we didn't do well, the things I feel really confident, the things maybe they can do outside of practice on their own to continue to increase their skills. So that's one philosophy that I have. But like, what would you see when you're, whether it's mastery coaches or youth coaches at rec girls volleyball? Like, what are the qualities in the coaching application that you feel transcend regardless of age group?
Well, there's different focuses at different ages. And so there's a model called the long-term athletic development model, and it's a science-based model. And what they take a look at is like at the ages that you've been talking about with your kids around 9 and 10, that it really is much more about fundamentals. And then there's some other phases that kids go through. And so those phases are about training and then learning how to compete and then excelling, in competition. So the American model is like this race to adult our children. And so fundamentals is like the age that you're talking about. So making sure that fundamentals are in place, technical, physical, and mental fundamentals. Okay. And then creating an environment that is stimulating. And that doesn't mean chill and relax. Yeah. And it doesn't mean too hard. It just means that right little moment where, and you know it, when a kid is like this versus like this, or they're like, whatever, coach, you want to find that right mechanism where they're just kind of on their front foot, gravity, is pulling them slightly forward, but they still feel balanced in attention. Yeah. And so what am I saying is that it depends, but the essence is that you ask them. So that's mastery of older people. At a young age, you do a little bit of asking. What'd you feel? What'd you learn? What'd you think? What were the thoughts before? What were the thoughts after? Yeah. You're asking them to verbalize what is inside. It's brilliant. Now, it's probably at the 9...
At the young age, it's hard.
Yeah, call it 50-50.
Okay.
Maybe even if it's 80-20.
Yeah.
20% them talking, 80% you.
More directive.
Yeah. And then as we go up, we flip that,
flips,
and you're asking more of them. So that would be the first thing is like.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I can see a very
intel.
difference between the way I feel like I have to be as a coach for 9 and 10-year-olds is very different than how a coach had to coach me.
That's right. Yeah.
And that was a very different experience, right? The way we're operating is we're in constant feedback, constant reminders, constant both encouragement and corrections, and it really never ends, right? So we'll take baseball. We're in baseball season right now. When we're coaching our 9 and 10-year-old baseball teams, it's Johnny, get your hands ready. Here we go. Pitch is coming. Hands forward. Thumbs up. Be on your feet. Prep steps. All right. Reset. Move over. You're too deep. Remember now. Base hit. Cut to. It's constant feedback.
Yeah.
If they were in high school and college, the baseball coach is sitting in the dugout, chilling, eating sunflower seeds because it's just a different level. But threading that balance between overwhelming them with information, but if you don't give them it, if you just sat there quiet, you would have a 2-hour game, and this is just my personal philosophy, I'd waste 2 hours of instruction if I just sat on a bucket and hung out.
And also, we recognize that we can't give too much information because there's a short circuiting that takes place, right?
Yeah.
So one cue that can prime 4 is what is a mark of great coaching and great parenting. One cue, thumbs up. Maybe that's not the right one. Elbows in.
Maybe that's
so it's one cue that triggers 3 or 4 other things, and then as you start getting those triggers down, it's like, oh, so they're just focusing on that one thing.
Yeah.
That's why basketball, like elbow in, tends to kind of line some stuff up.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I spend so much time like thinking through like what are those triggers. The other interesting balance that I find, again, firsthand as a coach, and I'm sure a lot of coaches at the young age find, is there is a balance between, and we touched on it earlier, I'd love to hear your perspective a little more deeply, developing every kid, developing every individual on the roster. And then threading that needle based on the level that you've put your child in of winning and competing and competition. And as you know firsthand, and we're all experiencing, competitive sports in America is getting younger and younger by the year, right? The days where it didn't start getting competitive.
Not the right trend. This is not the right trend for us, and it is happening. We are skipping. We need time to develop fundamentals.
Yeah.
You can't, if you accelerate that, and it sounds like you care about fundamentals.
I care. My entire philosophy of coaching young kids is we're going to do it right. Fundamentals, approach, listening skills. When a coach talks at you, pick your eyes up. The most beneficial part of my practice is the last 5 minutes when we break them down and we recap practice. You're going to stand still. You're not going to pack your bag. You're not going to pick your water cooler up 100 times. I'm going to ask you for 3 to 5 minutes to stand still, look me in the face, or look this guy in the face, or whoever it is. And when someone's talking to you, you're going to talk. That has nothing to do with sports. And I always say, whether you're in your classroom with your teacher or at home with your parents, give them your attention. And when I'm done talking, go run around and be 9. I don't care, right? But those to me are what matter the most. The winning, in my belief, is a product of doing all of those things. If I have kids that are technically sound, want to be there, is huge. They're not there because their parents want them there. They're not there because their parents' friends are on the team. They want to be there. They do it. They are coachable. We teach the technique. We have the right attitudes. The winning will take care of it. And I think a lot of the guys, and people think I care only about the winning. To me, the winning is the least important thing. We just happen to win a lot.
Yeah, there you go.
Right? To me, I think everyone looks at it backwards.
Well, I love one of the practices that you have, which is at the end, there's a significant set of moments there for people, and including the parents in it is fantastic. Yeah. So you're right on the money there. Winning is a byproduct. Over-indexing on technical training, physicalness, and then mental skills. That would be the essence of what fundamentals are.
Yeah. And then, just that balance is something, and again, it's not perfect. I also have the belief that you can enter, there is an offering for every family based on what your child or what your family's into. You want a very highly competitive team, league team, you can find that. You want the very carefree, one of the dads or moms coaches the team, it's casual, it's rec, everybody plays equal time. There's also that. So my other belief is we have a responsibility of parents to put our child not on the safest team, we've covered that, but on the appropriate team. Because I believe that it's fair to them. If I went and put my son on this highly competitive basketball team or my daughter on a highly competitive soccer team and they weren't ready, yes, we want to challenge our kids, but we also can't crush them.
No, it's a problem for a whole host of things.
Yeah, and that's not the answer either. So I think there is this, again, back to all the decisions that need to be made, which weren't this way when I was a kid growing up. There was no decisions. You played for your town team until you went to high school, and you played for your high school team, and that was it. The decisions parents are making today start at 8 years old, 7 years old.
Yep, it's happening.
Whether we like it or not, it's happening.
So the thing that I would add to the mix, and I'm coming from a very particular lens, is add the mental skills and fold it into it so that we are providing them with the requisite skills to deal with the fast-paced nature of growth.
Yep.
And so these mental skills are not hard. You teach self-talk for confidence. You teach breathing for a sense of calmness. You teach imagery so they can use their imagination to see success in the future. You teach goal setting, which is writing down goals that are 100% under their control. And if you did those 4 things only, and you did that every month, one a week, you'd have a full curriculum for a month.
That's great.
And then you do it the second month, same exact ones. And you just hit those big 4. And you did it, like if you had practice, what are your practice? Tuesdays and Thursdays?
Yeah, right? Twice a week,
Twice a week. So you hit confidence Tuesdays and Thursdays, and you're speaking to them about self-talk, using your own examples, asking them to talk about theirs. Show a video on your phone about, like, what do you think Michael Jordan was saying to himself? Like,
There's a lot of ways to do it.
There's a lot of ways to play with it, but it's self-talk, it's breathing, it's imagery, and goal setting over and over and over again. So that when they get into high school, like, they've got great command over that.
That's really interesting. So as we wrap here, and I know you talked about it earlier, so we've covered so many different, and we could probably go on for 2 more hours. There's so many things to unpack here. But if I'm a family, I'm a parent, or a youth coach, whatever it is, and I get done watching this episode, and I hear all of these conversations and all this insight, where, aside, obviously you're Finding Mastery podcast, and hopefully you think are resources, but like, what are existing resources that are age and developmentally appropriate that I, as a parent, can now go out and seek and continue this conversation and continue to develop a better understanding of all of this that we've covered today?
Okay. So I think one of the national resources in the United States is fantastic. It's the Aspen Institute of Sport. And they've got a play model that takes a deep dive into youth sport. And so their website, that resource, is their commitment, and it's awesome. And so I would start there as an incredible resource. I would also, as parents and coaches, be well-versed with the long-term athletic development model. LTAD, it's known.
Okay.
It's research that was born out of Canada, and it is foundational to think about the developmental stages for sport over a lifetime. And so LTAD.
It's really interesting. And if you're a family, is there ever too late of a time to approach that model?
No.
If your child's 12 years old and maybe they've been operating under a different philosophy, and you watch this podcast today and we've reshaped your thinking, and you go home today and you say, I'm adopting a long-term athletic development model from today on forward, is it ever too late?
It's not too late. And I'd say the one thing that folks could rotate toward just a little bit more is seeing the essence of the human that you're wanting to coach your parent, like really understanding them. And that takes a full commitment over a lifetime, or as long as we have with them, to see the being before the doer.
Yep.
Coach the doing, but see the being.
That's interesting.
And then the other thing is teach mental skills. Fold it in every day, whether you're a parent or a coach. And then the third thing I would add to it is help them understand how to put words to their emotions and feelings and their thoughts, and have them either write them down or share it with you, but you have to create space for that because it's very intimate. Support, then challenge.
And that's hard for adults.
Yeah.
Let alone...
Because we weren't taught it.
We weren't.
This is not that hard, but we weren't taught it.
It was not something we were ever really encouraged to explore.
You had to figure it out on your own, right? Like you figured it out by stick and tape and glue and...
Is that a generational thing? I know people fall back on it's a different world, different generation, but is that true? Do you think that's is that real?
And science
And
wasn't there.
is a lot of it's just understanding? We're more conscious of it now.
Science is better at the application of the science of excellence. Which
It's
is
not so much that we ignored it. We weren't so much that aware that it was even there.
That's right.
That's interesting. Yeah. All right, but before I let you go, I got three quick little things for you, and we're going to kind of put a bow on this conversation. So the first thing I have for you, what do you, as you look back, what are things you know now regarding youth sports and the application of it that you wish you knew or were available to you when you were a kid?
That my identity was not attached to my outcome, my output.
That's so important.
Yeah, it's that I was an intact being that was separate and different, but related to what I was able to express. So the expression part is where judgment, critique, the pressure comes from that. And if it wasn't good enough, I wasn't good enough. Or actually, it wasn't good enough. And so being able to have that healthy separation between the two, I wish I had that better.
And I think that's something we all struggle with. I know for a long time, my identity as a person was always through my athletics. It was my outlet.
That's right.
And my parents exposed us to other things, and they were always involved and loving and around and would push us, would comfort us, would support us, would bail us out of bad stuff. But like, as a family, we were all boys. My dad was a high school football coach. Both my parents were gym teachers. Like, athletics were what we did. And I think my brothers and I, our identity, it wasn't anyone's fault. We loved doing it. Like, at no point in my life, or my brothers, at no point did anyone ever force us to do anything. We were,
cool. Yeah,
but we took it to a very high level, and we were almost borderline obsessive of it. And I'm still relatively borderline obsessive, but it was always internal. And I see elements of that with my own children, and other elements of my other children that don't have a lot of that. And I'm cool with both. So that's really interesting perspective. As you look at the landscape today, like, where does youth sports sit in this very moment in your mind? Good, bad, in between.
Incredible vehicle for growth, corrupted by adult anxiety. And so the average age that kids drop out of school the average age that kids drop out of sport is before the age of 11. There's resources that are a challenge. There's socioeconomic conditions that are a challenge. And then there's bad parenting, bad coaching when it comes to helping create the environment for kids to love, to create and explore and get better. So it's, I'm bullish on it. I've learned so much from sport. It's been one of my greatest teachers. And not the coaches, but the sport itself. The engagement of trying to figure out and unlock something has been one of the greatest teachers for me. And so I'm concerned because we used to helicopter parent, and now we're Zamboning parenting. Zamboning parenting is kind of getting the ice smooth so that there's an easy glide in life. Yeah. Man, like, that's not how it works. It's just not how it works.
That's I've never heard it put that way.
Yeah.
But you're in essence laying the path for them, and you just tell them to stay between the guardrails and everything will work out, and they have no ability to critical think, problem solve, deal with adversity, build a toughness, a grit, a resilience.
That's right.
And that's really, and to me, that's the whole idea of youth sports.
Yeah, passion, perseverance for the long-term
Can you teach it?
100%.
I completely agree.
100%.
I've had this conversation with other parents and other people who say, your kid, he just loves it. Like, he's just born that way. I said, maybe, but like, I think it's been cultivated a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
I think you can learn perseverance, you can learn toughness and grit and
100%.
Dealing with adversity, but you can only deal with it if you allow your kids to be exposed to it.
Yeah, well, you need a yin and a yang.
Yeah.
It's not just a hammer for every, it's not all things are nails. Like, it's a yin and a yang. It's support and challenge. Support and challenge.
That's really interesting. And the last thing I have for you before I let you go about your day is looking into the future. Like, what are the challenges now? We've established where we are in the moment. We've established some perspective looking back. Youth sports moving forward, like what are the challenges that as a whole youth sports is going to face in your mind moving forward?
Access and coaching skills. So if we had more kids that had access, 50% of kids in communities that struggle with resources report the reason they can't go to play sport, they would like to, 50%, because of the demands of school. And some of the demands of school, it's not, and these are in lower resourced communities that I'm speaking to. It's not just the school alone. It's because they also have to do some work.
Home-
They have to
home
take
life.
care of
Yeah,
some
right.
stuff, so
They're raising younger siblings. They're filling in for mom and dad who are, it's interesting.
so that's one. So access is a real concern, and the average cost is about $1,500 to $1,900 for one kid to experience sport outside of school for a year. Now, that seems, in some of the programs I've been exposed to, that's on the low end.
Ooh.
And so, but that's the average cost, which is a high cost for families that are in the middle America, the middle socioeconomic status. That's a very high cost. So those two are one of them. And then the other is that mentorship, the 6 hours of mentorship from the coach. Let's pour into them. Let's create systems just like in Europe, just like in Canada, where other countries have poured into the coaching standards, where the certifications are real. There is a bit of I'm a card carrier. I've done my training,
interesting, yeah.
and it's really quite loose in the United States.
Yeah.
So I pour into the resources so that they can have great frames of reference, models, tactics to be great coaches.
Yeah, and the coaching point I think is so interesting the way you frame it, because it's you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. If you want your child to be exposed to quote unquote very good coaching, it tends to be in a more competitive streamline, right? And if you want your kid to be more in an instructional, developmentally appropriate at a younger age, and you want your kid to be exposed to that, it's really just dads who after work are just figuring it out. They're Googling things, how to run a soccer. And a lot of people like me are struggling with both. So guess what? I end up doing it myself.
Yep. So that's why the Aspen Institute of Sport is a
It's
great
really
resource.
interesting.
It's a really nice resource. And
I would love to drop my kid off at every one of his sports and be his dad and help out a little bit and give my and if the guy needs help running practice, great. But this is a really high qualified coach to coach this sport, take a step back. But if the void's there, I fill it. It's just my nature. And then it leads to the entire rest of the conversation. It's a challenge.
It is. I'll just quickly share
Yeah.
that I dropped my son off, and or my wife does, and he's coached, fortunately, by an Olympian,
Yes.
and he's running the team practice, and it's like, I'm not doing a thing.
But that's such a nice,
And
what
so
a position
what
to be
I
in.
do is I parent. I see the being. I love him for going for it, and he's got a really intense, great coach that's doing that bit. If the coach was aggressive or abusive or too intense and it was overwhelming, I'd pull my kid right out of there. I would go to a lower quality, and he's 14. I would go to a lower quality technical coach, but a higher skilled developmental, emotionally and mental coach to create that wellness over a lifetime. And listen, even if he really cares about getting better, you get some privates.
You can supplement.
Yeah, or you go start going on Bing or Google or wherever your search engine is to find out what can I do with my kid in my garage or my front yard, or what are some fundamentals that I can reinforce and have fun with.
Yeah.
So,
and that's a conversation for a whole nother episode, because the opportunities out there in today's world to get specialization and instruction, and that's a whole conversation in and of itself. Well, Mike, that was an unbelievable conversation. That's exactly why we thought your voice was the voice to kick this entire journey off. You opened up my eyes to a lot of new things, I think you've put us in some interesting directions that we are now as a show going to go and explore that maybe we weren't aware of in the beginning. So that was exactly why we reached out to you. I just think your voice and your perspective and your experience in this world was so important for our viewers to evaluate where they are personally. And if they're not happy with what they see, like I asked you, it's never too late to alter your approach, right? There's no finite beginning and end to this whole life cycle. And anyone who wants to follow or hear more of you, Finding Mastery, your podcast, they can find that anywhere their pods are available. I've written a book with Pete Carroll. I know we talked about that earlier, but you were amazing.
I want to say thank you. Your body of work is extraordinary, and your passion to develop the next generation is felt. And thank you for including me in it. And this is going to be a great resource for folks that you're creating.
We think so too. Well, I appreciate it, Mike, and appreciate your voice and time today. Thank you. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation, because I know I can think back to sitting there across from Michael for hours and just exploring all these different areas, personally reflecting, kind of thinking back to maybe something he said that resonated with me, and all the while thinking, if this is hitting so close to home to me and there's so much relatable information, I can only imagine there has to be millions of people out there listening to this saying, I get it. I've been there. I've had those conversations, whether out loud or just internally with myself, that I'm coming away from this a little more prepared for that next hard conversation with their child, or maybe that next difficult conversation with their coach. And if there's just one aspect that each viewer gets, and it very well could be something different that's stuck with them, then mission accomplished. The purpose of that conversation, as we said at the top of the show, was to kickstart us into all these different avenues, into all these different directions, and explore this world of youth sports. And I know from having the conversation and then going back now and listening to it, every time I listen to it, I come away with a little bit of a different piece. And I think that's the exciting part, because we don't know exactly where this journey is going to go. But I'll tell you what, we've gotten off to a great start, because the conversation with Michael Gervais was just fascinating. If one thing that I took from that conversation, and this could be very different from anyone else who listened to it, is towards the end of our conversation, his advice to me was over-rotate. Meaning, you spend all this time, you don't want your children to feel like your identity has to be their identity. They're going to get that passively just by being around your family, and the things they're exposed to and the things they're interested in will gravitate towards sports and competition and whatnot. He goes, really, really overemphasize school, the arts, books. Spend more time on the other areas of their life. The sports area is always going to get attention. And I just thought that was such great advice, especially, and again, this hit home personally to me. Maybe there was something else that someone else, they took it, but it just made so much sense where, hey, my kids are passionate about their sports. All their sports are different. They're into it. That's going to take care of itself. We're going to spend time on that because that's where their love is. But let's spend an equal amount of time on developing the entire person, the entire being, the entire child, because one day when that sport ends, it cannot be their identity. That all of a sudden, when that sport, it could be high school, it could be college, whatever that time is, you need to make sure that there's a whole being there that's ready to live the rest of their life. Now, it's a big part. Sports could be a very big chunk of your life, but for the vast majority of this population, it's not going to be their career. It's not going to be their calling. And we need to teach these kids that that's okay. We are not playing 10-year-old baseball because you're going to play in the major leagues one day. And I just felt like that was such sound advice. And again, that was something that resonated with me for our family and personally. But I just feel like there's so many great nuggets, so many pieces of advice, and was the perfect way to kickstart this conversation and this journey. And we are so excited now to see where this journey leads. We have some really cool conversations that we've already had with some really unique and interesting people, and also some really cool ideas and some different paths that we're going to go forward, and we're going to challenge ourselves. We're going to challenge our established, kind of train of thought and what we've been trained to think and what we've been conditioned to think, and say, okay, we're going to step outside of our comfort zone here at You Think, and we're going to make sure that we go out and we get all perspectives, and we can package it all, bring it to you, our viewer, and really build this notion that we are on this journey together. Everyone's going to take their own individual parts out of it that are going to best serve their families, best serve their children. Because at the end of the day, that's the mission, that's the passion, and that's the journey of You Think. We hope you guys enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed these first few conversations. It's just been incredible. It's been quite an experience for me. As always, we'd love you guys to go on, rate, review, subscribe, wherever you get your podcasts. Make You Think a part of your weekly routine. Make You Think a part of your family's journey, particularly as it comes to youth sports. So thank you again to our sponsor, Invisalign. You Think is brought to you by Audiorama, and we look forward to seeing you guys next week on all our future episodes as we continue this journey together. Thank you guys for trusting us, and we'll talk to you soon.